Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Brabant. Today, I'll be presenting my research on Lufthansa, the German airline industry, and the pandemic. After graduation, I'm going to become a pilot, so I find this topic compelling, and I hope you will too. The bottom line up front is that Lufthansa has received a substantial amount of government aid in order to survive the adverse effects of the pandemic. This aid has helped Lufthansa remain financially solvent and avoid extensive layoffs. However, the German government imposed certain terms on its aid, which may adversely affect Lufthansa in the post-pandemic market. In fact, Lufthansa was so apprehensive of the government's conditions that it initially rejected the aid, and Lufthansa has promised to return to a fully privatized company by 2023. Personally, I share Lufthansa's reservations. According to my research, the German government can more efficiently administer this aid to help Lufthansa by relaxing some of its conditions and making the aid strictly a loan with no strings attached. This will not only help Lufthansa recover faster, but it will keep costs lower and help the German economy as a whole. I believe that if the German government were to restructure its aid along these lines, it would benefit both Lufthansa and the German people. For my methodology, I utilize scholarly, peer-reviewed articles, government reports, Lufthansa company reports, and contemporary news articles to collect information. After analyzing the raw facts and the opinions of experts in the field, I came to my conclusions for this research. The reason that the global airline industry, and by extension Lufthansa, is in such a tough place is because of COVID-19. COVID has clearly affected many sectors of the economy, but has had a particularly devastating effect on the airlines. Both goods and passenger trades have decreased substantially. This has had a tremendous financial impact on Lufthansa. According to their annual report from 2020, Lufthansa's numbers are down significantly. Total flights are down 67% from 2019, and passengers are down a whopping 75%. In the same year, Lufthansa was forced to lay off 20% of its workforce, or a little more than 28,000 employees. All this has led to a revenue loss of 6.7 billion euros for Lufthansa, or about 7.9 billion US dollars. Clearly, financial losses of this magnitude are not sustainable, which is why Lufthansa has turned to the German federal government for assistance. The German government offered, and Lufthansa accepted, a relief package of 9 billion euros. Part of the reason the German government offered this aid is because the airline industry is considered by most countries to be a strategic industry. Essentially, this means that the government believes the benefits of the airline industry go beyond the pure economics. The terms of the government's aid essentially boil down to three parts: a 5.7 billion euro loan, a 3 billion euro credit facility, and 300 million euros worth of company stocks. This is notable for a few reasons. First, none of this aid is a gift. Lufthansa must, at some point in the future, pay back all that it's received. Second, the government now owns 20% of Lufthansa, and for a company that was formerly fully privatized, this is a significant term. Which brings us to our next main point, the German government's conditions. In addition to offering Lufthansa loans instead of grants, the German government tied other terms into its aid in order to address what it saw as problems in the airline industry. The first government term is, implicitly, that Lufthansa take measures to reduce its CO2 output. European countries in general agree that the airline industry is a source of extraneous CO2 emissions. Some governments, like the French for example, have explicitly tied CO2 reduction measures into the conditions of their aid. Germany has refused to explicitly include these measures, but, as part of the aid, Lufthansa committed itself to reducing its CO2 levels. Explicitly, the German government has demanded that Lufthansa decrease its fleet size, in part by retiring certain aircraft and in part by ceding other aircraft to its competitors. The German government has also decreased the number of airport licenses available to Lufthansa. Essentially, this means taking spots and takeoff and landing rights away from Lufthansa, and this in turn leads to Lufthansa's competitors gaining these airport licenses. The main airports in which Lufthansa lost licenses were Frankfurt and Munich, major hubs where Lufthansa has been a long-time historical presence. During this time of recovery, Lufthansa is forbidden from paying dividends to its stockholders. The government also gained 2 appointments to Lufthansa's supervisory board with limited voting rights. The government has filled these 2 seats with industry experts, but this certainly raises complications for Lufthansa, who now must contend with the government when making critical business decisions. My research proposes that the German government could make this aid to Lufthansa more efficient by eliminating these restricting conditions. While environmental sustainability goals are commendable, the middle of a recession is not the optimal time to impose them. Rather, they should be implemented during a time of economic growth when firms and consumers can afford the higher costs. It also harms Lufthansa and raises its costs to shrink its fleet size and restrict its airport licenses. For a company that is struggling to earn revenue, losing critical resources will harm it in both the short and long run. Finally, government ownership of 20% of the company and voting rights on the Lufthansa Supervisory Board will certainly harm Lufthansa's competitiveness and efficiency. Certainly, this government aid comes with both advantages and disadvantages. Some of the advantages are clear. First, this government aid has helped Lufthansa maintain financial solvency after suffering enormous losses. It also saves tens of thousands of jobs, helping keep critical workers employed. More broadly, this aid injects 9 billion euros into a struggling economy. Lufthansa is able to spend money, its employees continue to earn a paycheck, and this cash injection ripples throughout the economy, helping countless other sectors. This aid also protects a strategic industry, as we mentioned before. However, nothing is free. The government aid also comes with disadvantages. First, an injection of 9 billion euros into a singular company distorts the natural processes of the free market. Without this aid, Lufthansa would likely fail, or at least see a detrimental decrease in its operations. However, it begs the question, should Lufthansa survive? Could a more effective company rise from Lufthansa's ashes to better serve the German economy and the German people? The point of this research is not to delve into the inner workings of Lufthansa and whether or not this is the case, but these questions are necessary to be considered whenever looking at government economic stimuli. Second, this government aid breeds economic inefficiency. Again, the free market tends toward efficiency. In this case, Lufthansa is being rewarded to an extent for its inefficiency. While it's clearly not in the German people's interest, or in the interest of Lufthansa's thousands of employees, for Lufthansa to close its doors, government aid is by definition a reward for inefficiency and poor planning. While COVID was unexpected and certainly not Lufthansa's fault, and the German government's travel restrictions did nothing to help Lufthansa, the German government is using taxpayer money to help Lufthansa that it could have employed elsewhere. Finally, this aid will certainly affect Lufthansa's future competitiveness in the airline industry. It does this primarily by raising Lufthansa's costs, cutting its fleet size, and restricting its airport rights. Clearly, the German government's bailout of Lufthansa not only affects Lufthansa in the present, but it will affect Lufthansa in the future. Lufthansa will certainly face increased competition in the post-COVID landscape. This is due in part to its higher costs, smaller fleet size, and restricted airport rights. All of these create holes in the airline industry, which Lufthansa's competition will race to fill. This situation also lends itself to an imbalanced playing field in the post-COVID airline market. Consider the airlines who did not take government bailouts and who are thus not subject to the same restrictions as Lufthansa. They'll have lower costs and will thus be able to engage in price wars and other competitive strategies that Lufthansa will not. Finally, before COVID, the European airline market was following a trend of consolidation where the larger, more efficient airlines absorbed or bankrupted the less successful airlines. However, due to government interference to hinder the major airlines such as Lufthansa, this consolidation trend has, at least in the meantime, been reversed. Prices will also look different in the post-pandemic market. Namely, they are going to increase. This is primarily due to higher airline costs, which are derived from increased environmental measures and reversing economies of scale. Economies of scale is where, as a firm increases production, its average cost of production decreases. Typically, this is seen in industries with high fixed costs, such as airlines. As airlines such as Lufthansa are broken up and made smaller, they may actually see higher costs because they can no longer be as efficient, and these higher costs will be passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. In conclusion, we discussed Lufthansa, the German airline industry, and the pandemic. We talked about how COVID's impact, the federal aid provided to Lufthansa, the conditions the German government attached to the aid, the effects of the aid, and the impact on Lufthansa's future. If you are interested, here are the sources I drew upon for this presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at the following email address. I would like to thank everyone who helped make this research possible: Dr. Vanchina, the German department, the German 580 class, and the University of Kansas. Thank you again for your time today. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and have a great rest of your day.